a podcast that celebrates the art of teaching, learning, giving, and growing. I'm Wynne Leon, and in this episode, I'm with author Mari Sarkisian Wyatt. She's written an incredibly powerful memoir, Saving the Fourth Generation, about her quest to have a third child via in vitro fertilization. She magically puts words to the complexity of the IVF process and what it's like to have goals and obsessions worth suffering ups, downs, griefs, and miracles for. Mari and I talk about the different types of goals we have as we go through life and her Armenian grandmother's wisdom about what it takes to make them happen. There's so much legacy in Mari's story because her quest is in many ways a response to the shattering trauma that came from both of her grandparents' families being decimated in the Armenian massacre of 1915. We talk about Mari's way forward as the sole child of her generation to have kids. She tells us how she navigated both the price and process of IVF. Her story is heartbreaking, miraculously, and completely gripping. We talk about her advocacy for her artistic son and how writing about her IVF process 20 years after the fact provided some healing and delight in the miracle of family. Mari's story involves a lawsuit, so in accordance with the settlement, she's not on screen for this episode. Nonetheless, Mari is entrancing as she shares the power of her journey and the warmth of her voice. I know you'll love it. Hi, Mari.
Hi, Wynne.
So good to talk with you. You've written this book, Saving the Fourth Generation, and it's such a beautiful memoir that touches on so many deep topics. IVF, health insurance, pregnancy, family planning. Can you give the elevator pitch for this book?
Sure. Thank you, Wynne, for inviting me to be on this podcast. And thank you for calling my book beautiful. The premise is very simple. At age 45, I decided to have a third child. And I spent the next 6 years enduring a series of unfortunate events and abject failures in the uncertain world of infertility. Along the way, I met parents and hopeful parents who had suffered even worse setbacks and tragedies. So this is basically the story of what women and their partners are willing to go through to have a child. Even though I started out with noble intentions to give my autistic son and my neurotypical daughter another sibling to be around to help and support them after my husband and I were gone, my quest, as you well know, quickly became an obsession, which actually harmed my children in lasting ways. So this is also a book about goals and obsessions and selfish ideas and how they can hurt the people that you love, even though you don't intend it. The message, however, is that if you just keep working toward your goal, one step at a time, someday you might just succeed, and hopefully your family will forgive you.
And you capture those ups and downs that, I've been through the IVF process. We've just talked about it. I have two beautiful children that I conceived by IVF, but I've suffered a miscarriage in the middle of that too. So, this book is personally just spoke to me so deeply. You talk about those goals and you use this beautiful analogy of the butterfly, bee, and murder hornet. About that desire throughout, and you use it throughout the book. Did this come from your wise Armenian grandmother?
Actually, the hierarchy, the three different kinds of desires, they did come from my grandmother.
Yeah.
But the insect metaphors were my own creation. I don't think they had murder hornets when she was alive, or she didn't know about them. But my grandmother would say that if you have a desire, I can't do her accent, have a desire that remains in your head. She said, if you say, wouldn't it be nice if, but you don't do anything about it, never happened. So I compared it to a butterfly that kind of flits around in your head without a specific destination. But my grandmother actually called it a diamond ring that you keep in your pocket. She said, if stays in your pocket, no one sees it. It doesn't shine. You must take it out. So that was the first level of desire. The second level is the one that she said, if you want something, you need to work for it. And so I compared that to a busy bee who's constantly buzzing around in your mind, telling you that you have to do this, you have to work. But the third level of desire, which I compare to the murder hornet, that's the overarching obsession, which you kind of have to get through IVF. She didn't think of it in the negative terms that I did in terms of a destructive hornet. But when I was about 10, we were all watching a documentary about immigrants. And someone on the show complained that a certain ethnic group was pushy and aggressive. And my grandmother said, of course they are pushy. If you need something, you push. The nice ones, you think the nice ones got here? The nice ones didn't make it. The nice ones got buried back home. So that became the hierarchy that I kind of distilled from her wisdom and put it in the book. And she kept on saying to us, if you want something, you have to keep at it. And she said, it doesn't matter who complains. It doesn't matter. You don't have to think of anyone else. You don't have to think about the Turks. You don't even have to think about your family. You just do it. And then she finally said, how you think Samuel and I got here, it was not because we were nice. So that was the basis of my three levels of desire. But it's interesting because I remember a movie called America, America, about an immigrant wanting to get to this country and what he went through to get here. And I thought, I can't remember, was the guy Armenian or Greek? So I looked him up and it was Greek. But as I was reading, one of the critics called the movie a hair-raising movie about the immigrant experience. So I thought, okay, my book is a hair-raising memoir about the infertility experience.
Yeah, well, and I love that you bring in that immigrant experience from your grandmother, because part of your goal, your desire, came from just the absolute trauma of those previous generations.
Right.
Your whole family was wiped out in the Armenian massacre of 1915. Do I have that right?
Both my grandmother's whole family and my grandfather's whole family, they were actually wealthy. Everyone has a story of being wealthy in the old country, but they sent a nephew to Ferris State Institute to study petroleum and automobiles, because they were actually approached by Standard Oil in the old country to become agents of this developing oil industry. And so my grandmother and my grandfather were dispatched to be chaperones for this young man in 1913, expecting to go back. And then in 1915, everyone in their family was murdered, and they were never allowed to go back. So that affected not only them, but their children. And my generation, as I said in the book, no one had kids.
Right.
My cousins didn't have kids. My brother didn't have kids. I was the last one who was even old enough, and I was 35 when I had my first child.
Right.
Ended up with autism. So I had this goal of keeping my family going too.
Right. And you do that, history and the previous generations so well, because you start the book with, that Psychology 101 text. I think that's, if you traumatize cats, the next generation is going to be severely, and the third generation is going to be even more reclusive, and there won't be a fourth generation.
Yeah, there won't be a fourth generation, right?
And so, and in light of that, your IVF journey, it makes so much sense, because you're not only trying to provide for your immediate family and your children, the two children that you already had, what their future would look like, but also save that fourth generation. Because as you said, you were the only one.
Right. I was the only one left. And now my older daughter in terms of genetics and DNA is the only one left. And she is starting to feel that. She's in her early 30s, but I keep telling her, you have to have kids for yourself, not for the past.
Right.
Although I wouldn't have believed that if someone told me. So it's weighing on her mind. And a friend of mine whose family, whose father lost everyone at Auschwitz. His children, his son has autism, his daughter is neurotypical, but he would say Hitler cannot just postpone the extinction of my family by one generation. He really feels that sense that he has to, that his family has to keep, that he has to keep his family going. And I kind of felt that too, that the Turks can't win.
Right.
We have to keep the family going.
Right. And so that gives so much context to all that you went through in those 6 years of IVF to create that third child. And you make such an incredible point about IVF on page 55. IVF requires a certain level of trust. In fact, an enormous level of trust. You can't see the eggs, you can't see the embryos, and IVF failed much more often than it worked in those days. So how would I even know if there were any eggs retrieved, any sperm selected, or any embryos at all? I couldn't. I just had to have faith. I had to believe that those pictures on the waiting room walls were real people and not paid actors.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Did that ever go through your mind? You must have gone through your mind too.
Yeah. Well, I was fascinated. So, as we talked before we recorded, I did this 15 years after you did. So there were some differences between your journey and mine. And I think clinics failed or succeeded more in my time. But even then, my fertility clinic gave me a white stone with the letters believed etched in it. When I graduated. I know, I thought that was so interesting. It was when I went through the 10-week ultrasound with my son, and it struck me as so interesting to that it's a scientific process. They're based on the science of this, but it's an interesting nod to the miracle part of the process. Whether it's etched in stone or it's lucky numbers, which is one of the ways that, you
that I
thought about it. Yeah. We've got to hang on to something to get through all that uncertainty and trauma.
And you're right. There are ways to terminate a pregnancy, but you cannot force nature to initiate one. I've heard the Chinese have invented artificial wombs, but until that time comes, there's still this miracle that somehow is beyond our control. Right. I still belong to an IVF donor Facebook page because I still have 14 embryos I would love to donate to somebody. And now people have pictures of their blastocysts. They do genetic studies. So there is some proof that I did not have in my day.
Right. Well, just even the difference that we were talking about, where in your day they grew the embryos in the lab for 3 days,
right? And
so they didn't have as much of a sense of how long or how well that they would mature from then. And in my 15 years later, they grew them for 5 days, and that sort of helped to predict a little bit better which ones would implant well.
Yeah, I've heard that. Well, my daughter blasted early. So actually, when they were at day 3, she had still blasted. And that's the story of her life. Thanks to herself.
I love that. Right. But, you talk about we talk about the effect of trauma on future generations, as we just mentioned with your Armenian family and your grandparents' families. But there's also healing in unpacking and writing about our history and patterns. And one of the things that you say about your son, your autistic son, is that caring for his sister healed him in more ways than I could have ever imagined, especially after he'd spent years blaming himself for Armin's death.
Yeah. That was a beautiful thing to behold. He was 13 years old. He had just been very sick. He almost died from a mystery illness that we never quite understood. And then he said that he fell instantly in love with the baby. I originally thought that a girl would give a playmate for my daughter, Sonia, who neurotypical and had to deal with this weird brother of hers.
Yeah.
But Matthew just he said, I just fell in love and I immediately wanted to be a baby again. And it was interesting because he had missed a good chunk of early childhood because he couldn't communicate and he couldn't play with other children, and he was walking around the house reciting the alphabet, and yet he went back. He did a kind of rebirthing with her. He would crawl around the room with her, and because he's had so much therapies, I would, let him babysit. I would come home and he had turned the entire living room into a maze with boxes so she could crawl through it for proprioception.
Right.
And I'd come home and she'd be up on the ceiling, and he'd be holding her above his head, and I'd say, "What are you doing?" And I'm just, helping her with her interoception or whatever it is. And then when she was 2 or 3, I let him take her to the playground, and the kids really liked having this older child play with them. So at last he got to engage in imaginative play that he had missed. And one time I came to the playground and this woman said, "Oh, you're the mother?" So that was, and they're still very close. They're still very close, although she's gone her separate, everyone's gone their separate ways now.
Yeah. Well, and so your youngest now, the girl that you had from IVF is 23. Do I have that
23.
Right?
Yes.
That's great. And you just mentioned Matthew being sick. I mean, the other, real innovation that sort of switched while Matthew was young and when he was experiencing that illness was that autism became more researched or more science-based, so that you actually went to because you did a lot of advocacy to try to figure out what was going on with him.
That was an incredible journey of luck, actually, because when he was 18 months old, I'm a copy editor, as you know. When he was 18 months old, I was asked to do a book called The Sound of a Miracle by Annabelle Staley about this thing called autism. And I had vaguely heard of it. I'd read a Life magazine article about an autistic boy who would only eat McDonald's hamburgers or something. And the book was wrenching. She not only had an autistic child, her other daughter had died of leukemia. Her husband left her for a man. Someone stole her car. It was wrenching. And then she discovered a sound therapy called auditory integration training. And my son was about 18 months old, and I was, crying through this manuscript, and I went and like hugged him and kissed him as he was sleeping. And I thought, thank God my son doesn't have this. But very shortly after that, he started demonstrating symptoms of autism, which I thought maybe I had invented, but then he wasn't speaking. He shied away from social experiences. And so when he finally got diagnosed, I was told that it was a very rare condition, that only one out of 3,000 kids had it.
Right.
But little by little, and I was also told that it was untreatable, lifelong, and I should just put him in special ed. But then I would hear about somebody's therapy that worked a little bit, and I went and I immediately got him auditory integration training too, based on what I had heard from that book. And then I since became friends with Annabelle Staley later on. But she said, "Oh no, there's things, he wasn't walking very well because his feet didn't work together, so I got him foot therapy, and then I heard about vision therapy, and then I heard about this kind of play therapy, and every time I heard about something, I would go get it." And right after, he was born in 1988, right in the beginning of the 1990s, there was suddenly this baby boom of autistic children. But because he was a little bit older, I would do something first, and then people would call me up and say, "Hey, we heard that you did foot therapy. What do you think?" This is before the internet. How did it work? And they would tell me about a therapy. So I would do that.
Wow.
And then I'd find other things, or then I would invent something, and then other people would hear about it and call me up. And so little by little, every time I heard of something, I would take advantage of it. And the big stumbling block was that he could not interact with other children. He didn't know
Mm.
how. They would get hostile or he would shut down. And I thought, what if I just hire some kids,
Mm.
some neighborhood kids to come and play with him? I
Mhm.
paid them $4 an hour. I
Mm.
found a woman with 5 kids who needed money, and they came one child per day after school to come and play with Matthew. And so I've kind of invented the rent a friend, which is now an acceptable
It
um
is,
yeah,
really.
so yeah, you don't have to pay $100 to an adult, you just pay $5 to a kid or whatever
Hmm.
the going rate is. And we did that for many years. We had rent a friends, and he learned how to be a kid. And the rule was you don't have to, you can act like a normal child, you just can't reject him. So
Hmm.
that's one of my I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, as you should be, as well as the digestive and eating issues that you help solve.
Well, that was Annabelle. She had a conference right when Matthew was so sick that he was dying. Really, he was so skinny. He was very lethargic. He was hallucinating. And I went to this conference, and it was all about biomedical treatments for autism that I had never heard of before.
Hmm.
And two of the doctors there, I followed them around, like tell me, like a little puppy, and they told
Hmm.
me to do various things. And within a couple of weeks, he had snapped out of it.
Amazing. That is
Yeah, it was.
amazing. I mean, really is. I mean, you talk about your 6-year IVF journey being harmful, possibly to your kids, but I mean, I think the level of parenting and advocacy for all your kids is just remarkable.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
I got to say, we your camera's turned off because you've written this book under a pseudonym. Because as you in the book, there's a lawsuit that was mentioned,
Right.
right?
I had to disguise all the names and the locations, so it actually took place in a different state,
Mm-hmm.
but one that had similar climate,
Mm-hmm.
that had a similar hospital situation. But because one of our tragedies was due to a medical error, we
Right.
settled with the hospital, but I had to sign a non-disclosure
Mm-hmm.
agreement. So there's no way that anyone could trace it back, but
Right.
I didn't want to risk it.
Right. Right. Well, we appreciate you telling your story and all the different circumstances. So, do you think that writing it out, 23 years after the beautiful birth of your amazing youngest daughter, has that been healing for your family?
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, yeah, I thought I was over it, but when I sat down to write, I realized that there was still a lot of emotion
Mm-hmm.
tied up to the loss. When you lose a child, well,
Mm-hmm.
when your miscarriage.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to the grieving group, someone made
Mm-hmm.
the point that it doesn't matter how old that child is, you
Mm-hmm.
still grieve
Right.
the same way.
Right. I mean, that's just heartbreaking and amazing because you did the work to do the grieving at the time, and then
Yeah,
you come back and revisit it, 20 years later, and just I think that there's so much of a blueprint of healing and of hope in this book. I just loved it.
thank you. You are a writer too, aren't you?
Yes, I do write. I've written technical books, but I also have written in that we talked about that time when I started IVF, and my dad died the next
Mhm.
day, and so my I wrote a memoir about my dad, which I'd been
Oh,
working on before he died, but he died in a bike accident, so it was a surprise. And so I spent the 9 months of having my daughter
um,
in your utero, and I swear, I've said this a million times that in that process of writing about my dad and his death and her birth, I swear they crossed.
wow, what an emotional time for that. That must have been.
Yeah.
Well, Edgar Casey said the souls just, find another body to come back to
Yeah,
Earth. So
it could be. I mean,
yeah.
it's interesting because I just thought that I wasn't going to have any time after I
Oh,
gave birth to write. And, I found my pocket to do that, but I thought I'd get that done.
how old was he? He must have been very young then.
He was 79. I was 46 when my daughter was born, and 50 when my son was born. So my dad he was young, but it just a fluke of an accident.
Wow. And he was healthy. And I must
Mm-hmm.
have been if he was biking.
Mm-hmm. And
Oh,
in a gated community in a way that you just wouldn't expect, except for um, it just happened.
oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank
That's
you.
why you have to wake up every morning and just be grateful that nothing is going, when nothing happens,
Right.
as I said in my book,
Yeah,
it's a
as you,
miracle.
yeah, you say that and so beautifully in that blog of your book. There's
Thank
so
you.
much to be grateful for, and I think and maybe that's my biggest takeaway from your book of this IVF journey. I mean, we're so grateful for the children that we have, the
Yes.
generation that we created, that sometimes we don't remember the losses, and it's important to chart those as well.
I used to think, okay, 5 years from now, I will have a child. I will forget all about this.
Hmm.
And now it's 23 years later, and
Yeah.
I haven't forgotten, but it's a part of my life.
Hmm.
When I spoke to the grieving counselor who had lost her only son at 5 years old,
Hmm.
she said it just becomes a part of your life. It doesn't necessarily heal, but it becomes it's bearable. It's something
Hmm.
that is just part of your experience.
Right.
Although if I hadn't had my daughter, I think it would have been a lot different.
Hmm. Probably for all of you.
That's true. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
your Matthew, your oldest son, he wouldn't have had all that healing experience of being able to be a child and help raise a
That's
child.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really meant a lot to him because my daughter couldn't cry
Hmm.
when she was born, which is a very interesting way to have a newborn,
Hmm.
who can't cry.
Right.
But we had to watch her all the time. So I would hold her in my right arm because I'm left-handed and copy edit with my left hand. And
Hmm.
and she would watch this pencil go back and forth. And then Matthew would
Yeah.
would hold her. And then when I needed a break, I took her to the kids zone at the YMCA, and she didn't want to leave us because she was with us 24 hours a day. So
Hmm.
he would just hang out with her. And again, the
Mm.
kids thought this was really cool, this
Right.
older kid. So he actually stayed there as a volunteer for almost 2 years.
Mm.
And he really, it really helped him a lot because he got to be involved in that imaginative play. So he wouldn't have had that experience without her.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and then another interesting thing too about she became very dependent on us, and her dad, who wasn't living with us at the time, wanted to take her swimming so that he could bond with her. But she was already bonded with Matthew and wouldn't play with Wesley in the pool.
Hmm.
So Wesley kicked Matthew out of the pool and said, "This is my time with my daughter, and you can't. She can see you, but I don't want her swimming with you." And so he would sit down at the side of the pool, and this attractive high school lifeguard would talk to him. And he said, I have autism. I'm sort of a boob. And at the time he wasn't really in school because he didn't go back to school till he was about 17. That's a whole other story. And she said, "Well, what do you need to know about social skills?" So
Hmm.
she was bored, and it was a Friday night, and she wished she were somewhere else. And so she taught him how to be a teenager. It was a really beautiful thing. She taught him the rules of engagement and how many times you call your friends, and how many what's acceptable and what isn't. And she really taught him how to be a teenager.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, I know. And he's now a writer himself. He wrote a book about this, about learning how to be a teenager
Hmm.
from this lifeguard. So if Wesley hadn't kicked him out of the pool,
Right.
that probably wouldn't have happened.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, it reminds me of something from Nikki Giovanni, who was a poet laureate of Virginia Tech, and she talked about how all experiences, none of them are wasted. And she likened it to her grandmother's kitchen, where, all the food that came into her grandmother's kitchen was put to use in some way.
Huh.
And she talked about our lives being the same, all the things. And I love that story you just told, because it illustrates that.
Huh. That's a wonderful analogy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You have to- and that you have to make use of everything that you're given too.
Right. Well, you've done such a beautiful job of that in this wonderful book, Saving the
Thank
Fourth
you.
Generation. So thank you for coming on to talk about that.
Well, you're quite welcome. Thank you. It was great to meet you and talk to you.
Thank you for listening. Our music was written for us by the incredible duo of Jack Campora and Rob Koenig. For show notes and more great inspiration, see avitiva.com, avitiva.com.